Hi everyone, and welcome to today's ALCTS webinar on preserving digital photographs. I'm Stephanie Lamson. On behalf of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee and the Preservation Week Working Group, I am delighted to introduce this free webinar as part of ALA's Preservation Week. Our presenter today is Bill LeFurgy, Digital Initiatives Manager for the National Digital Information Infrastructure and Preservation Program at the Library of Congress. He leads the in-depth communications team, which interacts with a broad range of people interested in preserving access to digital information. In his former professional lives, Bill dealt with electronic records at the National Archives and Records Administration and served as Baltimore City Archivist and Records Management Officer. While he has memories of punch cards, monochrome monitors, and 30-pound portable computers, he is also an enthusiastic creator and consumer of social media. He has a BA degree in history from McGill University, as well as an MLS and MA in history from the University of Maryland. Before we begin, a few quick notes on today's webinar. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them into the question box on your screen, and Bill will do his best to answer as many questions as possible at the conclusion of his presentation. Also, please note that today's presentation will be recorded and available at the ALCTS webinar website. You're also invited to use the Twitter back channel ALCTS to interact with other participants during the webinar. However, please continue to submit questions for the presenters in the question box on the screen. Neither the presenters nor hosts will monitor Twitter during the presentation. And with that, I'll turn the program over to Bill.
Hello. Welcome to the webinar. Get ourselves situated here technically. I'm going to talk to you today about some tips for preserving your personal digital photographs. I'd like to thank the Association for Library Collections and Technical Services for hosting this webinar as part of Preservation Week. And Preservation Week is really a great opportunity to highlight personal digital archiving and to help individuals and families take care of their digital memories. This is really important because, as most of us know, more and more digital photographs are being taken and need to be taken care of. And we here at the Library of Congress have been providing advice for personal digital archiving for the last couple of years. And I'll draw on information available on our website, which is digitalpreservation.gov. We're talking here today about photographs already in digital form. Much of this is born digital, which means it's created digitally and often has no hard copy version. Now, digital preservation is a topic that can pretty quickly get into all kinds of technological complexities with acronyms and all kinds of technical terms. And I'm going to do my best to avoid this. This presentation is geared to the non-expert and aims to provide them with a starting point for personal digital archiving. The idea is that once people get started, they can drill down deeper into the subject by visiting our website and other information resources. Now, the talk is aimed at a general audience, but let me say to the librarians, archivists, and other informational professionals out there that I think personal digital archiving is a great opportunity for us. Now, one reason for this is professional. Personal digital content is coming into library and archival collections, and it's in our professional interest to have this material well managed before it shows up on our doorstep. And I think the best way to do this is to provide broad-based digital preservation outreach, such as I'm going to be doing today. Another reason that it's important or a good opportunity for librarians is that helping people manage their digital photographs builds community support and really helps to raise an institution's profile. And the need for personal digital archiving advice is going to keep growing, and many, many people are going to want that advice. And I personally believe that librarians are exactly the right people to provide this help to people. Now I'm going to talk about the key differences between preserving digital photographs, which are bits, electronic bits, and hard copy photographs, which are can be referred to as atoms. But before I get into some of those differences, let me say that people often associate the two very closely. Lots of people think that when you say personal digital archiving, it means scanning analog originals. And whenever our team here at the library goes out to public events, we always get questions about how to scan existing photographs and slide collections and so forth. Now, the Library of Congress sees digital preservation as working with information that's in digital form only. This information can be born digital, or it can be data generated from some sort of scanning or digitization project. And either way, we concern ourselves with how best to keep digital data usable over time. So when asked, we do our best to provide basic tips for scanning and then quickly move the conversation to caring for the data that comes from digitization. So that's all I'm going to say here about digitization of hard copy original photographs or slides. Now, as I mentioned, there are huge differences between keeping physical photographs and digital images. Photo prints and slides are eye-readable. It's very easy to understand what they are and to understand their basic content. But digital images require special machines, computers, to use them. And if you don't have the exact right machine, you really have absolutely no idea what's on a hard drive, a CD-ROM, or even some sort of cloud computer. Now imagine, say, 50 years from now, a family member finds a box of yours with some photo prints and a shiny round plastic disc with a hole in the middle. The finder will know what the photo prints are, more than likely, but will they have a clue about that disc, something maybe they've never seen before? And even if they do have an idea that this was some ancient device that people used to store digital information on, are they going to be determined enough, and are they going to have enough money to try and discover what's on that disc? Because it's more than likely they're not going to have any kind of equipment at hand to be able to understand what's on it. And maybe they will be able to go out and attempt to pull information off that disk. But there's really even a bigger hurdle, and that is the data on the disk might be corrupted and unreadable. So what you see on the screen here is a pretty typical way that lots of people have kept traditional photographs over the years, more or less casually packed into something like a shoebox. And it's a system that works pretty well. You can keep a shoebox on a shelf for a long time with no special care. You can take it down years or decades later, and you can still look at the pictures and have a good idea about what they depict. And chances are the photographs will also be in pretty good physical condition, and good enough condition that you can comfortably pass them on to your family so that they can continue to use them far into the future. Hard copy photos are so durable because they are made of relatively reliable and long-lasting materials. Photo prints can take a fair amount of abuse without losing their informational or emotional value. You can see the photograph on the slide here that's been torn and then crudely mended with some Scotch tape, and then the tape has left residue on the picture, basically kind of an archivist nightmare. But despite all that, you can still recognize the people in the picture. Well, you can understand that there are people in the picture, and you can see their face, and you have a pretty good idea about what the photo's depicting. And another reason why hard copy photos are good for the long term is that you can use them without any special equipment. You don't need a computer or any other fancy device to just pick up a picture and look at it. When we come to digital photos, we're facing a whole different range of challenges, new challenges. So here are a few. Storage media, for example, can go obsolete. Some of us may remember floppy disks. Those of a certain age can remember using floppy disks. They're not around anymore. Computers are very fragile machines, and it's easy to damage them, drop them, even do nothing to them, and sometimes they break. Digital photos are extremely vulnerable during disasters such as fires or floods. And I think probably an underappreciated risk to digital files is that they are so easy to scatter among many different devices and social media services and websites. It becomes very hard to keep track of all the different places where you may have digital photos. It's also very easy to make a mistake when you're working with digital files. You're innocently trying to do something and you press the wrong key, and you may end up deleting your file. It's not unusual that when somebody makes a mistake working with a photo or another digital file, that the technology just isn't very forgiving. It won't appreciate the fact that you didn't mean to do that. It just does it. Now, digital cameras also can be complicated devices, and they've got all kinds of different settings that must be properly adjusted even before you take any pictures. And unless you have the right settings, you could end up with some photos of lower quality and that are harder to work with. Now, as I mentioned, showing that old photo with the Scotch tape on it, hard copy photos can degrade gracefully. They can endure some pretty rough handling and still be basically pretty useful. But digital files can be corrupted or lost in the blink of an eye. That's because the long sequence of electronic bits that make up a digital file really must remain in perfect condition for a computer to be able to make sense of the file. If even just a few of those tiny bits get damaged or corrupted, the whole file essentially crashes and is gone. And something like that can be visualized by looking at this picture right here, which is quite lovely. And again, if some of those bits go bad, that picture turns into this, which is basically your computer saying to you, sorry, that picture is gone. And when things are gone in the digital world, they can often be gone for good, as in just pretty much impossible to be able to pull them back. And most of us probably have some experience in accidentally deleting an important file or having a hard disk fail. And that's really, when you think about it, anything that's in digital form faces just that risk. And all our digital photos basically are facing that risk. So I've kind of gone through some scary bad stuff about digital photos, but there is some good news. You can take some simple steps to ensure that your digital photos last. And the key really is active management. And what that comes down to is moving beyond the put it on a shelf and forget it shoebox approach that works so well for physical photographs. What we really have to do is address the specific vulnerabilities of digital files. And the key here is vigilance. We have to be vigilant now working with our digital photos, and we have to continue that vigilance into the future. Now, with digital photo preservation, as I mentioned, some issues arise even before you take a picture. Again, cameras have settings that you need to pay attention to. And the settings can be for things like file format, file size, and metadata, or additional information about a picture. Now, what you choose in terms of settings has an impact on how much storage you'll need for your files and what details are known about individual photos. The best place to learn about your camera's settings is the user manual. But if you're like me, you may not spend less time looking at manuals. But it's certainly true that getting to know the settings for your digital camera really pays off. Some cameras offer a choice between two file formats. One is called a raw image format, and this is basically minimally processed data. And the second format would be a JPEG format. Now, RAW is preferred by advanced photographers, such as the person in this picture, because it offers the highest image quality and the most flexibility for image correction. JPEG is very popular and suitable for many purposes. It's also what's known as a compressed or lossy format. Compression and lossy formats basically means the file is made smaller by discarding some fine details. At the upper end of compression, the results are hard to detect with the naked eye. In other words, you really can't tell that it has been compressed and that some very superfine details are gone. If you start moving down the scale in terms of compression, making it more and more compressed, then you do start to notice a difference in the picture. It looks more pixely, it looks less focused and less clear. I think for just about every sort of typical person out there, every sort of standard consumer who wants to take and keep digital photographs, JPEG is perfectly fine as long as you use the right settings. Now, as I mentioned, a camera can offer choices of things like small, medium, or large JPEG images. It might also offer choices for basic, normal, or fine images. And the key to remember here is that the higher the setting, the bigger the file size. Each individual picture will be larger on digital storage, and there'll be less of that compression. So really, in a nutshell, the higher settings result in pictures with more detail and higher quality. And again, the trade-off is storage space. If you have high settings with lots of detail and quality, you'll be able to store fewer pictures on your camera. The best bet, really, is to go with the largest file size for the best quality. Now, cameras automatically include certain kinds of technical information known as metadata to librarians and archivists. And this technical information is embedded within digital photographs. Now, there's a very basic step that everybody really needs to take with their camera, and that's to make sure that the date and time on the camera are set to the correct date and time. That's because when these pictures are taken, the camera will automatically include that information with the photo, and that's very, very important. And for most cameras, it's not that difficult to be able to set time and date. You have some other options. You can perhaps automatically include metadata like GPS, locational data, or sometimes even customized information for pictures. Metadata is very important for adding to an understanding of photographs, And the best advice that we can give you is to add as much as you possibly can to the pictures as you're taking them. Most of the work involved with preserving photos, though, takes place after you've snapped the shutter and taken the picture. What we say is that it's good practice to copy the photos from your camera to your computer or another storage location as soon as you can. And that puts you in a position to preserve and actively manage your photos. Let me talk a little bit about the big picture, no pun intended. But many people really do have large and varied collections of digital photos that maybe they're not in the best order. Maybe they're not perfectly described. Maybe they actually are, in point of fact, kind of messy. And on top of that, it's not unusual for people to be going out and taking pictures all the time and adding new pictures to the collection. And sort of thinking about organizing and preserving what might be a pretty messy collection might seem pretty overwhelming to just about anybody. And on top of that, computer technology can be very intimidating and frustrating. And the two of those together, that can really sort of put people in a mindset that it's just too hard to be able to do much with all these digital photos. But a key takeaway here that we try to tell people and to get them to believe is that you don't have to be an expert to be able to work with your digital photos. This guidance is aimed at non-experts, and I think can be very helpful. What we're doing here is just providing some starting points, some tips, really. And there are more details on our website if anybody really wants to kind of dig deeper into some of the issues that we're talking about. Another key takeaway here is that the time and the effort that anybody spends working on their digital photos is totally up to them. There isn't a one way to do it, and there isn't one sort of program for sitting down and doing this. It's not unusual for us to be squeezed by time and very reluctant to get committed to a project that requires lots of work. What we're doing here with our tips is to enable people to achieve positive results even if they only spend a little time applying them. This could even be as little as a few minutes a week. If that's all you have, that's great. You can make real progress working with your photos, even with that little time commitment. And what this could entail, for example, is maybe all you can have time for at this point is to make one extra copy of all your pictures and put that copy in a safe place. If you've done that, and that's all you do, that's a huge step. And that's something that is not a huge commitment of time usually. Now, of course, the more time you spend, the better results you'll get, and the more useful your collection will be to you and your family over time. So we have 4 basic tips for personal digital archiving, and I'll be talking in a little bit of detail about them, but just quickly to kind of go over them. First one is identify where you have your digital stuff. Do you have multiple devices? Do you have them on websites? Where are your digital photos? Just get an idea about your universe of digital photos. The second tip is that it's a good idea to decide which of these are most important. Not every digital photograph is created equal. Some of them are out of focus, some of them are duplicative, some of them are just have less value. And if you've got the time and you're comfortable doing it, it's really good to go through and get rid of the less than great pictures, so that what you end up with is a smaller, sort of better collection. Third tip is to organize the files that you've selected. And the fourth, and perhaps the most important tip, is to make copies of all your digital photos and store them in different places. So let me talk about how you can put these into action. Tip one, as I mentioned, is just kind of do a quick rundown on where all your digital photos are. Maybe you've got a couple of different cameras, you've got a smartphone, you've got a laptop, maybe some are on your home computer, some are on some sort of social media website. And when you identify where all the photos you have, you'll be in a really perfect position to be able to start making some decisions about how to manage them. Now, the best place to start is with the device or the location with the photographs that you immediately think of as significant. This comes down to that time and effort question. If you're just getting started and you think, okay, I've got half an hour to work on this, maybe you just want to start with your smartphone if you have one, because that may be where your most important pictures are. Or it could be on your laptop or some other place. The goal is just to pick a place and get started there. For example, on the screen here is my own phone with some of my favorite family pictures. And if I were just sitting down and getting started working with my digital photos, I'd start right here. After identifying your files, the next step is to pick the ones that are most important. We can have many hundreds of digital files on a single device and many thousands, maybe even tens of thousands in total. And as I mentioned, not all of them necessarily have the same value. And by selecting the best ones, or the most important pictures, you can reduce the volume that you need to manage. And the fewer you're managing over time, the easier it is. And I can assure you that future users will also thank you for selecting the most meaningful items, rather than making them wade through lots and lots of clutter and duplicates and bad pictures. But flexibility remains the key. And again, how you do this selection is totally up to you. If you want to go in from your collection and just pick out the few best ones, the best dozen pictures, that's good. And this doesn't have to be a one-time event. You can start by picking out the ones that are most important, and then you can come back later and pick out more if that's what you want to do. You could go through and pick out batches of good photos. It involves a little bit more work, but what you can end up with is a really good collection of meaningful pictures. In terms of strawberries, what you can do is just take the good ones and leave the bruised ones behind. But on the other hand, if you're not comfortable making any selections, or if you don't want to do the work to do selections, that's okay. You can just save everything and just deal with everything as one big group. And that still gives you or somebody else in the future the option of going through and making selections in the future. We do like to stress that it's okay, and I've mentioned this, I'll mention it again, that it's okay to go through and get rid of pictures. It's not unusual to have multiple copies of the same item, or maybe they're very nearly the same, that really don't offer any additional information. They just basically take up space. For example, if you were on a hike or something and you took a bunch of pictures and you came back, in reality, how many copies of pictures of this tree would you really need? Personally, I would say you would only need one, and you pick the best one, and then you delete the other ones. Now, I will say that when you do this, there are some technical considerations. You'll want to keep the most detailed and complete version of a picture. It's determined by factors such as image resolution and file format. So, for example, if you took multiple pictures of this tree using different cameras, and one version of the photo was more detailed, you'd want to save that one. And again, that's sort of getting into some of the more technical considerations, and there's more details on our website about that. Our tip 3 is to organize what you select. And what that means is to group your files into some kind of logical order to help others understand what the collection is about, and actually to help you understand what the collection is about, and to find individual photos. Now, as with the previous steps, the benefits grow with the amount of effort that you put in. The more time you spend organizing, the more easier it will be to be able to move through the collection. The basic strategy here is to create a hierarchical system of digital folders, also known as directories, on your computer. And what you see on the screen here is an example. The top folder is labeled Digital Archive, and then there are folders for other types of materials, including photos. And each one of those category folders can have subcategories arranged by date, topic, or some other method. The items you selected in the previous step can then go right into a particular folder. It's excellent practice to describe individual photos before or after placing them into this folder system. And this is metadata, again, as I mentioned before. It will help you, and it will help people in the future better understand what information the document contains, what the photos are about, who's in the photos, for example. And the best thing to do in this regard, and sort of like minimal effort, is to make sure that you change the file name. Now, when you take a picture with a digital camera, they'll give you some sort of automatic random file name, like img_123 JPEG. What you want to do is change that to some more descriptive file name, something that describes who's in the picture or where the picture was taken or something like that, to help you remind you what it's there, what the picture is of. Any additional details that you can provide, such as the place, the name of people in the photos, what's going on in the photo, so on and so on, is extremely useful. Now, the downside to this, adding this kind of metadata, is it's time-consuming. It forces you to go through and enter all this information for the most part. But if you can do this, you end up with a fabulous resource that's much more understandable to people who look at it. Now, what you see on the screen here actually is from an online photo sharing service, and it's a great example of describing, adding metadata to individual pictures. You know exactly what's going on and what these pictures are of, and when they were taken, and all that kind of thing. The problem here is that all this descriptive information should also be under your physical control, because it's not under your physical control if it's just on a website. For example, if these photos went away, or if the file sharing company went out of business, you would lose all that information. So it's a really good idea to make sure that you have duplicate information that's under your control, so that you can make sure that you keep it. So after you've developed your folder system for your photos, it's a good idea to print out or even just write down on a piece of paper a copy of that folder system. This helps in two ways. At first, it's a quick way to remember what kinds of files you have and how they're organized. And secondly, it's really useful for people in the future who are interested in the collection. And what you can do is keep a hard copy of the inventory with important papers like wills and so forth in a safe place. And you should also consider including a list of all the websites and social media sites where you have photos, along with your username and password. So if something happens to you, your family will be able to get to your information. Fourth tip is to create at least one duplicate copy of your photo collection and store it separately from the original. You might have your original collection on your laptop or home computer. You make a copy of that, and you send that copy as far away as you can. So for example, if you lived in Seattle, you could send a CD-ROM or some other copy to somebody who might live in Washington, D.C. So if there were a disaster that harmed your home computer, the duplicate copy would be safe. We actually say they should have at least one copy, but it's even better to have multiple copies. Each extra copy increases the odds that your files will be safe. And the question then comes down to is what kind of storage method should you use? There are multiple methods to copy and store digital files. You can use CD-ROMs or DVDs or external hard drives, or even a cloud storage providers. But we don't regard any of these methods as a silver bullet or perfect for long-term preservation. Few storage devices can really be trusted to work for more than 5 years. Some of them will, some of them won't. So it's best to be conservative because each one of these devices all has a risk of losing data over time. Cloud storage, as I mentioned, is the risk there is that files are under somebody else's control. They're not under your control. And if your cloud provider goes out of business, you may lose your files. So to deal with this uncertainty, we recommend that you use different methods to store your copies. Different methods and different media. You could use an external hard drive, as well as a CD-ROM or store it in the cloud someplace. So if one goes bad, you still have another copy, which should be good. You should keep the hard copy of the file inventory with each copy of your collection, your digital collection. That way, if a family member who runs across an old external hard drive or a CD-ROM, if they see the inventory with it, they're more likely to deal with it properly if they know what's on it. Now, we also say that it's good to migrate or move this content forward every 5 years. And this is a key example of what we mean by active management. Because what you've done work identifying, selecting, describing, storing your photos, your digital photos. But as you know, these are fragile and temporary, all these copies. So what you need to do is periodically check each one of the copies, make sure they're okay, and then every 5 years, just go ahead and make a new copy on some new type of media. And new media tend to show up with some regularity, so you may be using completely different media when you make your copies. And another part of active management is periodically adding new photos to your personal digital collection. What you do is you follow the same 4 tips for adding new pictures to your collection. And you'll want to update each one of your overall copies with the new files and keep your file inventory current. Here's a quick summary of the tips. Identify, decide, organize, make copies, and store them in different places. And as I mentioned, these are really a flexible starting point for being able to take charge of storing and maintaining your digital collection. And we have some additional resources that can help you. We have a section on our website. Here's the link, digitalpreservation.gov/personal archiving. We've got videos, we've got podcasts, we've got various kinds of handouts that should be able to help you get a further and deeper understanding about personal archiving. We have a video, which I highly recommend, which is a very short video, which kind of goes over some important reasons why it's good to do digital preservation. We have a Facebook page. Please like us on Facebook. We're very interested in engaging and interacting with people on this subject. We're on Twitter @ndip. Encourage you to follow us if you're on Twitter. And what you can do is ask us your questions using these social media tools, and we'll do our best to answer them. That's it for the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'd be happy to take some questions if anybody has any. All right, I'm looking at all your, some really good questions here. So you are saying that some of the storage places, such as flash drives, DVDs, media disks, may only last for 5 years. Yeah. That's just kind of a rounded number. Some of these devices actually may not last 5 years. They may kind of go out on you after 2 years. And I always hear stories about people who say, well, I've got a floppy disk from 20 years ago and I can still read it just fine. Well, that's great, but there's no guarantee that it will last. And certainly none of these storage devices have ever been made for permanent storage. They've just been made for short-term use. So again, in dealing with your important files, we recommend being very conservative. And as a rule of thumb, I think 5 years is pretty good. Let's see, what would be a correct way to name your files? There really isn't any one correct way to do it. I think the best advice is, and there are some resources online. You can use your favorite search engine and type in something like name digital files, and you can find a number of resources. And there are some schemes that people recommend. Probably the best thing to do is to find a particular scheme that makes sense to you and then stick with that and be consistent with it. If you use chronological, keep using it, and so that you have one sort of more or less uniform system of maintaining your collection. Can you recommend software or tools for embedding metadata? Geez, I wish we could recommend some tools. There are some very fine ones. out there. I can recommend going to photometadata.org, which is a project that we help fund, and they do talk about some individual tools on there. As government library employees, we are not we're not allowed to name any particular tools. Is there any way to change the file format of a photograph after it is put onto your computer? Yes, you can do that. And again, there are some tools that will transform or transcode, the technical term, a photograph from one file format to another. Most of the time you don't have to do that, at least not immediately. It's possible that at some point in the future, JPEG may be replaced by something else, fancier and better, and at that point you may want to do a file conversion. But for most people, generally you'll probably want to stick with the original JPEG format that your camera produced. And another risk that you've got for moving over to a different file format is there is the possibility that it may change the picture or change it in a way that makes it not as good. So it's something that probably ought to be dealt with carefully by most people. Isn't the best foolproof storage method a print? Yes. Thank you for asking that question. You know, I mentioned that physical prints really endure, and they have a long, successful track record. And with digital pictures, digital photographs, if you use the right kind of ink and the right kind of paper, you can print them out, and you've got yourself a very stable and long-lasting picture that you can put in an album, and just as you would a regular photo print. And we certainly encourage people to do that. The problem comes in, though, if you start dealing with lots and lots of pictures. If you've got thousands of pictures, most people probably wouldn't be comfortable printing them out. The other issue is that with digital photos, despite the fact that they're such a pain to preserve, they have lots of advantages. They're very easy to search. They're very compact. You can do all sorts of fancy things like put them in a digital photo frame and all that kind of stuff. So as far as most people are concerned, probably the best advice would be if you've got some super important pictures, like your wedding pictures or the picture of your kids when they're born, really good idea to print those out. But you also are going to want to try and hang on to the digital photos as well, because you're certainly going to want to continue to use them as time moves on. Changes in programs, such as new versions of Windows, sometimes won't allow access to older files. That's a good question, too. We've actually noticed that that isn't such a big problem. It does happen, certainly. If some of the first digital cameras that came out may have had some pretty funky file images, file formats they were using. And certainly some old programs, like if there's a photo management program that you used, I don't know, in the 90s, and you try to open that program in your current computer, you may have some trouble. But what we found is that images like JPEG, very common, very well supported, tend to be okay, and it's actually endured pretty well over the years. And looking ahead, I mean, eventually, as I mentioned, at some point, something better is going to come along. But at this point, looking forward, I think you'd be safe with your files in a JPEG format, and safe as long as they are, again, kept as individual files rather than, kind of lumped into some sort of commercial program that stores them and provides access. Let's see. Do you recommend JPEG over TIFF? That's a little bit of a technical question. TIFF is a very well-known, very well-supported format. It's actually used a lot for scanning. If you're scanning an original photograph or something, a lot of professionals and museums and libraries will use TIFF. And to get even more technical, they'll use an uncompressed version of TIFF. And they do that because it offers a very accurate, very detailed record. It takes a very accurate and detailed copy of the document. And it's sort of the gold standard. But for consumers, and particularly when you're using a digital camera, I'm not aware of any digital camera that shoots with a TIFF format. Usually the default is JPEG. As I mentioned, you've got the option of using the RAW format, and you certainly should do that if you're comfortable with the added work and the added complexity. But for most people, I think JPEG will do just fine. Again, as long as it's not super compressed and the images are large enough, I think you'll end up with a fine picture. Won't digital photos fade as well? If they're in digital form and the file is kept uncorrupted, they will not fade. They will look exactly the same as time moves on. I personally have printed out some digital photos using, a cheap printer and cheap paper, and I'll, put it on the refrigerator, and then I'll notice a few months later it's starting to disappear. And that's not a function of digital. That's a function of, a cheap photo printer. And there are services that will use better quality materials, and they should hold up just as well as a regular photo print. Is there an easy way to rename all the files quickly instead of individually? Yes, there is. There are some free tools that are out there that will do that. It's called batch processing, and it's not too complicated. Generally, what you do is you pick a certain type of name that you want to use, and you select the files, you hit a button, and the computer automatically goes through and changes what the camera assigned to the picture to what you pick, along with a sequence of numbers. And again, we can't mention any specific tools, but if you go to photometadata.org, that should help. Okay, I'm told one more question. Let's see. How reliable is storing digital files on a cloud? Should I be concerned about others having access to my files? Well, as I mentioned, cloud storage is great. It's fine. Just don't rely on that exclusively. Have another copy that you have control over. And in terms of others having access, there are sort of lingering questions about privacy and security in the cloud. I have to say, I use some sort of a cloud service, and I don't worry too much about it. Then again, I don't have anything super sensitive up there. Plus, I also have another copy. So, if you're super concerned about privacy and security, I wouldn't use it. But for normal family photos, I think it would be fine. So I think we're at time here. Thank you so much for tuning in and asking your questions. Really appreciate it. And again, check out our website, Facebook, and Twitter. And stay tuned for more. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill, for a very informative presentation with great practical tips. I hope all of our participants will be able to use what they learned here today to better preserve their own digital photographs. Thank you to all our Preservation Week attendees. For more information about preservation, please visit ALA's Preservation Week website, where you can find great tips and resources to help you preserve your own collections. For more information on upcoming ALCTS webinars, please visit the ALCTS webinar website. We hope you found today's session helpful. You'll soon receive a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to fill it out and return it to us. Your comments help the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee evaluate and plan future continuing education offerings. If you're interested in viewing parts of the presentation again or sharing it with others, you'll receive an email with a link to the recording shortly after the conclusion of the webinar. The presentation will also be archived and freely available at the ALCTS webinar website. Thank you to our sponsor for today's webinar, the HF Group. We would also like to thank our Preservation Week spokesperson, Steve Berry, for his support of preservation in ALA's Preservation Week. And last but not least, thanks to Kara Healy for her technical assistance today. Thank you all again for joining us. Goodbye.